Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Fem Naruto Hates Team 7 Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. The morning sun shone through a small crack in the curtains to shine directly on the peaceful face of a sleeping girl. Her eyelids fluttered and then squeezed more tightly closed against the bright light. She threw the blanket over her head and sighed contentedly into the soothing dark cocoon. Just as she was about to drift back into sleep, the alarm went off. The sound was blaringly loud in the early morning quiet of her apartment and she jolted out of bed, heart pounding. The blanket twisted around her limbs and she crashed to the floor. Shit, she groaned, fighting with the constricting blanket that had come with her. Uzumaki Naruto blinked open brilliant blue eyes and yawned. She ran her fingers through sleep-mussed golden hair, scratching at her scalp with dull fingernails. The alarm continued blaring through the small apartment until Naruto leaned up to smack it with the palm of her hand. It creaked ominously, but held together. The silence was almost oppressive after the deafening alarm and Naruto sat on the floor for a moment, wondering why she was awake. Then she remembered exactly why her alarm had been set and she scrambled to her feet. She rushed through an icy shower and re-emerged from the bathroom with one towel wrapped around her body and a second draped over her head. Naruto picked her favorite orange pants and jacket up from the floor and grimaced at the holes that liberally decorated them. Somehow, she had nearly forgotten how the events of last night had ruined her clothing, and completely changed her life. Although learning about the Kyuubi in such a way was devastating, Naruto actually felt kind of glad for the fox's presence. It was probably the only reason she was still alive. After failing the Genin exam because of her inability to perform the Bunshin no Jutsu, Mizuki had approached her with a highly suspicious, secret, way to graduate. Once she heard him out, Naruto had gone straight to the Hokage for advice. The old man hadn't seemed surprised at the information, but thanked her for coming to him. When Naruto asked if she could do anything to help, the Sandame's eyes gleamed as if he had been waiting for her to make the offer. Naruto had waited at the meeting place with a dummy forbidden scroll, but when Mizuki showed up, he had completely taken her off guard by spilling the beans about the biju sealed in her gut and then proceeded to do his best to kill her. By the time reinforcements arrived, Naruto was severely wounded. Despite the near-fatal experience, Naruto couldn't help grinning when she thought of how Iruka had defended her character. His warm acceptance had made her feel as if she were weightless. After Mizuki was apprehended and Naruto's wounds treated, Iruka gave her his Hitai-8 and the Hokage taught her a clone technique as a reward. Unlike the Genjutsu-based Bunshin taught in the academy, the Kage Bunshin produced physical clones and utilized Naruto's massive chakra reserves. Naruto had gone to bed sore and covered with painful cuts and bruises. This morning, her skin was smooth and unblemished, the swelling on her fractured ankle completely gone. She had always healed quickly, but never from so much damage in a single night. Naruto was pretty sure that the Kyuubi's chakra was to thank for that and she patted her stomach gratefully. "Thanks for not letting me die, Fox," she muttered, feeling foolish for even trying to communicate with the beast sealed within her navel. She wasn't really sure what to think of it. On one hand, the fox's presence was the reason why nearly the entire village hated her, but it had definitely saved her life and, according to the Hokage, was slowly increasing her already impressive chakra reserves. Naruto threw aside her ruined clothing and dug through her battered wardrobe for something else to wear for the team assignments. She couldn't decide whether to be disappointed at the lack of orange clothing in her drawers or not. While orange was definitely one of her favorite colors, she really only wore that jumpsuit so frequently because it had been a gift. It also made her figure shapeless enough that most people mistook her for a boy, which Naruto thought was hilarious. She figured that if people were unobservant or dumb enough not to notice that she was female then she wouldn't bother to correct them. It didn't really matter to her, and the misunderstanding enabled her to skip out on the boring kunoichi lessons, so Naruto had grown rather fond of the baggy jacket. But even she knew that wearing torn clothing stained with blood and dirt was a bad idea, and she dug through her wardrobe and pulled out a pair of dark gray pants that cinched just below the knee and a pale blue shirt with elbow-length sleeves and an orange spiral on the back. Naruto wrapped her chest snugly before pulling on a long-sleeve mesh armor top and the blue shirt over it. Although there wasn't much for her to bind, she had learned to use the thick material to protect her developing chest. She had found out the hard way that it hurt like hell to be kicked in the, no matter how small they were. After she finished dressing, Naruto returned to the bathroom to hang up her sodden towels and brush her teeth. She didn't normally bother with her hair, as she felt there were better things to do than spend time making it look perfect when she was about to go work up a sweat, but today a small part of her wanted to make a good impression on her new teacher. Her hair really was too short to do much, so she just combed out the tangles and allowed her bangs to fall softly across her forehead. Naruto grinned at the overall effect. With her hair styled this way, she looked a bit like the Yondaime Hokage, whose face she could see perfectly from her window. She tied her forehead protector, Iruka's forehead protector, on snugly and tapped the metal plate with satisfaction. Although her bangs fell across the headband, the engraved leaf symbol was still clearly visible. "I'm one step closer," she murmured before turning away from the mirror and heading for the small kitchenette. Naruto choked down a mealy apple and a dry ration bar, easing the tasteless mass down her throat with the last glass of cold milk. She peeked through her cabinets and sighed at the lack of food. It was definitely time to go grocery shopping. Hopefully her new sensei wouldn't keep them too long today, so she would be able to get some food before the shops closed. After washing out her glass and setting it out to dry, Naruto strapped on her thigh and hip pouches. She double-checked that they were fully stocked before sliding her feet inside the sandals by the door and leaving the apartment, making sure to lock up behind her. Slipping the key inside a small hidden pocket in her thigh pouch, Naruto steeled herself for the unpleasant walk through the village. She would love to be able to jump across the roofs like the other shinobi. She had tried once, a few years ago, and nearly killed herself when she slipped off the tiles. Naruto knew now, of course, that she probably wouldn't have died, but it was still painful enough that she hadn't tried again. Instead, she would have to walk through town where everyone pretended that she didn't exist until her back was turned, when the glares and hostile mutters began. She made a mental note to ask her new sensei first thing about the trick to sticking to the roofs. By the time Naruto reached the academy, she was tense and a little depressed. Even though she should have been used to it and now knew the reason for their behavior, she still felt ostracized and achingly lonely. Aside from a small handful, there were very few people in the village that even acknowledged her existence. She had a few buddies in her class, but they never seemed to want to hang out when school was over. Everyone else was either rude, demeaning, or even worse, pretended that she didn't exist. Naruto had carefully cultivated a cheerful and slightly idiotic reputation as a way to protect herself from the hateful jabs of her classmates and avoid suspicion from the adults, who were often afraid and angry when she seemed too competent. She certainly wasn't stupid and always did her best on her school work. The Hokage had told her that she should have graduated even without properly creating two bunshin. Mizuki had been in charge of the taijutsu and weapons portion, however, and had falsified her scores to make Iruka think that she needed the bunshin to pass. The window to her usual classroom was open and, needing to burn a little energy before sitting at a desk, Naruto scaled the side of the building instead of going through the main entrance. She jumped through the window and stifled a yelp as she landed directly on Uchiha Sasuke, who had unfortunately chosen the window seat this morning. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and the loud clatter of upturned chairs. Sasuke's elbow caught her hard in the diaphragm on the way down and Naruto struggled to breathe. When she finally managed to suck in much-needed air, she realized that someone was talking to her. She coughed and looked up into a pair of annoyed black eyes. "Will you get off me?" Sasuke repeated, sounding extremely irritated. Naruto's skin crawled as she registered their entangled legs and the way their torsos were pressed tighter. In a slight panic, She struggled wildly to free herself, only managing to get them both caught in the legs of Sasuke's upturned chair. She barely noticed Sasuke's furious exclamation as she narrowly missed kneeing him in the groin. Instead of freeing herself, Naruto only managed to attract the attention of the two girls who just entered the classroom. Yamanaka Ino and Haruno Sakura shrieked simultaneously at the sight of their idol entangled with the village pariah and joined the fray, clawing at Naruto and yanking at her limbs to get her away from Sasuke. Naruto began to hyperventilate, her bright blue eyes opened unnaturally wide as she tried to fight off the two girls and get away from Sasuke, who was nearly vibrating with rage. She wasn't used to people touching her outside of the few glancing blows she received in taijutsu practice. Even the Hokage rarely did more than a gentle pat on her head. Naruto couldn't remember ever having received a kindly touch from anyone else in her entire life. Hey, break it up, you four. Iruka's voice cut through the two furious girls' screeching protestations and he expertly separated them in an instant. As soon as she was free, Naruto fled to the middle of the aisle to get away, wide-eyed and breathing too quickly. She rubbed her arms, resisting the urge to use her nails to scrape at her skin. Iruka scolded Ino and Sakura, instructing them to sit on the other side of the room, and helped Sasuke to his feet. He turned a concerned look on Naruto and reached out to place a steadying hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away from the contact. I'm okay, Iruka-sensei, she said a little too quickly, clenching her fists and trying to bring her racing heartbeat under control. Iruka sighed, his soft brown eyes sad and filled with understanding. I'm sorry, Naruto. Won't you take your seat? He moved out of the row and gestured toward the empty seat at the end. Both Ino and Sakura started to protest loudly, but were silenced instantly by Iruka's scathing glance. Naruto edged around him and sat heavily in the chair. She could feel Sasuke's curious gaze burning into the side of her face, but she stoically ignored it and focused on taking deep, calming breaths. When she felt a warm flush creeping up her neck, Naruto buried her face in her arms on the desk. She was completely mortified and hoped that the rest of the class didn't notice her near meltdown. She could still feel someone staring at her. Naruto was certain that it was Sasuke. She really wished that he would just mind his own business. Maki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke. At the sound of her own name, Naruto looked up, realizing that Iruka had been talking up at the front of the classroom. And apparently announcing team assignments. You will be assigned to Hatake Kakashi, Iruka continued, glancing at Naruto before looking back to his clipboard. Team 8, Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, you're with Uehi Kurenai. Naruto tuned him out again and frowned at the information she just received. Her new sensei's name sounded vaguely familiar, but she wasn't sure when or where she had heard it. And she just had to be on a team with Sasuke, of all people. Naruto wished that she had caught the name of her other teammate and she looked around curiously to see if she could guess by her classmates' expressions. Sakura looked particularly ecstatic while Ino looked mutinous. It didn't bode well and Naruto bit back a groan of despair. She really hoped that she was wrong about that one. Having to deal with Sasuke and his holier-than-thou attitude was going to be trying enough, let alone adding one of his most rabid fans into the mix. She peered through the corner of her eye to find Sasuke still frowning thoughtfully at her. Naruto dug her nails into her palm to staunch the rising irritation and turned to face him. Please tell me that Sakura isn't on our team. Sasuke's expression soured, giving Naruto the answer she had been dreading. Great, she sighed, facing forward again and propping her chin on her fist. She tried to focus on Iruka's speech about ninja life, but the man really was accomplished at making something exciting sound unbearably boring. He finally finished talking and then opened the door to let a handful of shinobi into the room. Naruto perked up at the rather eclectic group of Junin. There were 2 women in the group and they looked badass enough that Naruto wished that one of them was her teacher even though, Kakashi, was unlikely to be a woman's name. As each ninja left with the groups of 3 genin, anxiety fluttered in Naruto's stomach. When Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji followed behind the last Junin, a man who smelled strongly like an ashtray, Naruto glanced uncertainly at Iruka. The man sighed and gave her a reassuring smile. Your teacher will be a little late, he explained, a pained expression crossing his face. Why don't you three have some lunch and get to know each other a little better? Naruto's mouth twisted in distaste, but she turned to ask her new teammates to ask if they wanted to go to the ramen stand. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Sasuke stood and slouched out of the room without a word. Sasuke-kun, wait for me. Sakura called, scrambling out of her chair and hurrying after him. Iruka winced in sympathy as Naruto let her head fall with a thunk onto the desk. Come on, he said, taking pity on her. I'll treat you to lunch. The genin returned to an empty classroom with no sign that Hitaki Kakashi had yet arrived. Sasuke resumed his customary position by the window, stoically ignoring Sakura's attempts to start a conversation. Naruto took advantage of all the empty seats and sat far away from her new teammates. After a slow hour had gone by with no sight of their sensei, Naruto began to get a little jittery. Her leg bounced impatiently and she gnawed on her fingernail. Naruto had a lot of chakra. A lot of chakra. And she had spent most of the day cooped up in a classroom. She accidentally caught her nail between her sharp canines with a faint crunch and coppery blood coated her tongue. Naruto jerked her hand away from her mouth and scowled at the cracked and bleeding nail on her thumb. She watched in slight fascination as it healed within minutes and then jammed her hands in her pockets to resist the temptation to continue chewing her nails. Naruto lasted another 15 minutes of trying to tune out Sakura's chatter before she stood and pushed away from her desk in frustration. Her abrupt movement caught the attention of her teammates, who both frowned at her. Naruto ignored their scrutiny, hating them for looking at her like she was a pest to be exterminated, and hopped lightly down to the front of the classroom. She stretched her arms over her head until her spine cracked and then paced aimlessly from the door to the window and back again. What are you doing? Sakura sneered. I can't sit still any longer, Naruto said. Sakura rolled her eyes. I don't know why you can't just control yourself. Sasuke-kun doesn't have any trouble waiting patiently. He's probably just entertaining himself with violent ways to make you shut up, Naruto grumbled under her breath. She then said more loudly, if you ever bothered to pay attention to anyone other than Sasuke, you would remember when we tested chakra capacity this year. What does that have to do with anything? Sakura asked flippantly. Naruto bared her teeth in a semblance of a smile. The point is, I have more chakra than everyone in the entire class combined, including the teachers. As Sasuke glanced over at her with sharp interest, Naruto's mood soured even further. Apparently no one paid any attention to her if this was news to him. Iruka had been so shocked at her results that he called in 2 other teachers to confirm her chakra capacity. Yeah right, dead last, Sakura scoffed, turning her back on the blonde with a huff. Naruto clenched her teeth until her jaw ached and then forced herself to relax. She took a deep breath and willed the burning in her eyes to stop as she turned her back on them to cross the classroom again. By the time she turned back around at the door, she had managed to regain her usual pleasant expression. Propping her hands on her hips, she stopped by the desk her teammates shared. I wasn't dead last, Sakura, she said. After the final exam, I placed 4th overall in the class. If that's true, then why did you get assigned to the same team as me and Sasuke-kun? The dead last always gets placed with the top shinobi and kunoichi, the pink-haired girl retorted, clearly not believing Naruto's self-proclaimed class standing. Naruto fought to maintain a neutral expression. Maybe our sensei requested me, she said lightly. Sakura burst out with cruel laughter. Who would want you? You are such a liar, she accused. Everyone knows that you failed the exam yesterday. Why are you even here? She suspiciously eyed the Hittite displayed proudly on the blonde's forehead. Tears prickled at the corner of Naruto's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, baffled and devastated by Sakura's cruelty. She risked a glance at Sasuke to gauge his reaction. The dark-haired boy was looking at Sakura with disgust, which made her feel a little better. At least the other girl's behavior wasn't going unnoticed. If you must know, Mizuki fudged my scores, Naruto said with false calm, not really sure why she was even bothering to explain to someone who clearly hated her. That's why he isn't here today. He's a traitor who tried to steal from the Hokage. He hoped that I would be so desperate to pass that I would do it for him and take the blame. Before Sakura could interrupt with another nasty comment, Naruto continued quickly. I know what you're going to say, and that isn't true either. I've never failed an exam before. Then why weren't you a genin 2 years ago? Sakura asked. The same reason Wonder Boy over there isn't, Naruto replied sweetly, jerking her thumb at Sasuke, who appeared to be doing his best to ignore them both. I don't have a guardian to sign the release form for early graduation. The pink-haired girl bristled at the imagined slight toward her idol and leaned over the desk toward Naruto aggressively. Before she could do anything else, the door drew their attention as it slid open with a quiet snick. A tall man with gravity-defying silver hair stood in the doorway. He wore his hitai at an angle over his left eye and a mask covered his face from the nose down to the collar of his Junin uniform. He stared at them impassively. After a moment of tense silence, a pleasant smile crossed his face, turning his visible eye into a happy crescent. A chill ran down Naruto's spine and she had the feeling that he actually wasn't happy at all. My first impression, you are all a bunch of brats. He looked at them in turn, dark eye lingering on Naruto's clenched fists. She followed his gaze and let out an irritated sigh as she realized that her nails had cut deeply into her palms. The skin stung painfully as she relaxed her fingers, but the little half-moon cuts were already closing, so she wasn't overly concerned. Naruto, why don't you go clean up and then meet us on the roof? Kakashi said, his tone making it clear that it wasn't really a suggestion. Naruto stilled, halfway to wiping her hands on her pants, and reassessed the amount of blood that coated her palms. Yeah, I guess I should. She edged past the Junin, glancing over her shoulder at her teammates, and headed down the hall toward the bathroom. Opening the door with her elbow, Naruto slipped inside and headed straight for the sinks. She scrubbed the blood from her hands and under her nails before splashing cold water on her face. Naruto leaned on the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection stared back warily. Just ignore her, she said to the pale face staring back at her. It isn't like you haven't heard worse walking through town. But it felt worse than the vitriol from the strangers in the village. Sakura was someone whom she had known since they first entered the academy. Despite that, the other girl had never shown any interest in getting to know Naruto. Sakura had always been rude, but never so deliberately cruel. Naruto took a deep, steadying breath to ease the pain from her expression. She slipped her forehead protector down around her neck and patted her face dry with a handful of paper towels. After tossing the damp wad into the trash can, she pulled her headband back into place and tapped the metal plate with a wry smile. I won't give up that easily, she said, determined not to let Sakura's jabs get to her. Surely if she didn't rise to the bait, the other girl would stop picking at her eventually. After she joined the others on the rooftop, it was apparent that Kakashi had said something to her teammates. Sakura was downcast and shamefaced and didn't even look at Naruto as she took the open space between them. Sasuke was as inscrutably surly as usual and Kakashi was, beaming at her. Now that we are all here, let's get to know each other a little bit. Why don't you introduce yourselves and share your likes, dislikes, dreams for the future? That sort of thing, he said, clearly waiting for someone to volunteer. Naruto looked at her teammates, and seeing that they certainly weren't going to go first, sighed and broke the silence. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, plants, and the people I care about. I don't like being touched or when people judge me based on rumors and, she paused, looking for the right word to describe the senseless hate of the villagers, ignorance. My dream is to be Hokage and for people to acknowledge me. Thank you Naruto, Kakashi said with an eye smile. Unlike in the classroom, this smile seemed genuine and she gave a small smile in return. The Junin indicated Sasuke. Next. The Uchiha grunted and dropped his hands away from his chin. Uchiha Sasuke. I don't like much and I dislike a lot of things. I don't have so much a dream as a goal. That is to kill a certain man. Naruto frowned at him, wondering if his goal had anything to do with the mysterious massacre of his clan. She had always thought that the culprit was unknown. Maybe Sasuke didn't know either and that was why he hadn't named any names. Interesting, Kakashi intoned blandly. But Naruto thought he looked a little concerned and definitely disapproving. And you? He gestured at Sakura. The pink-haired girl fidgeted. My name is Haruto Sakura. I like flowers and, she glanced at Sasuke with a blush, the thought of her crush reviving her spirits somewhat. I don't like Ino Buddha. My dream, she looked at the dark-haired boy again and giggled. What about you, sensei? Naruto asked curiously, inwardly shuddering at Sakura's embarrassing display. Girls like her and the rest of the Sasuke fan club gave Kunoichi a bad name and were part of the reason why Naruto had never felt the urge to correct anyone at school when they assumed incorrectly about her gender. Kakashi smiled again. Well, I'll tell you depending on what happens tomorrow. The first thing you three should know is that you aren't really genin yet. What? Why not? Sakura and Naruto cried aloud as Sasuke glared mutinously, as if by sheer willpower he could revoke Kakashi's words. The Junin was clearly amused at their reactions. I mean that there is still another test to pass, he said, almost gleefully. You remember the kids who came back for a review year, right? Well, they're the ones who didn't pass the second test. Why is there another test, sensei? Sakura asked, white-knuckled fists gripping the hem of her dress. Well, there is a lot more about being a shinobi than just what you are tested on in the academy, Kakashi replied. So I'm going to ask you a question. Tomorrow, you will meet me at 8 in the morning on training ground 7 to give me your answers. Whoever answers this question correctly will pass and the others will have to go back for the review year. He paused dramatically. What is the most important aspect of being a shinobi? Kakashi waited long enough to see the confusion set in on their faces before forming a single hand seal and disappearing, leaving behind a swirl of bright green leaves. Sasuke stood with an incomprehensible mutter and headed back for the stairs, raising his hand lazily in farewell. Rising quickly, Sakura hastened to follow him, but stopped short at the door leading back down into the building. I'm sorry for being so rude, Naruto, she said stiffly. She waited for a heartbeat and then made her escape down the stairs. A small pleased smile spread over Naruto's face. Well, that's a start, she murmured. Even if the apology had only been spurred by Kakashi's scolding, it still meant a lot to her. People didn't usually apologize to Naruto, even when under pressure. A handful of shop owners had been put out of business for trying to smack her around when she was little and then refusing to apologize for it even when the Hokage himself spoke with them. She wondered why she really had been placed with this team. Now having seen him, Naruto knew for sure that she had never met Kakashi before, so it was highly unlikely that he had requested her. And she definitely would have gotten along better with Shikamaru or Choji, or even Kiba. Naruto decided that it wouldn't hurt to go talk to the Hokage about it, given that he had the final say in the team assignments. She shimmied down the side of the building, rather than take the stairs back inside, and risk running into her new teammates again, if she were to be completely honest. It might not be a bad idea to ask him for advice on Kakashi's question too. Naruto felt sure that the question was just too straightforward. There had to be a catch. She made her way through town, ignoring the usual hostile glares directed at her back by the majority of the villagers. The Hokage Tower was only a few minutes away from the academy and she took her usual route to the office located at the very top, through the back door. It wasn't so much a back door as a hidden Anbu entrance, so she had to be sneaky to use it. If she was noticed, someone would intercept her and then she'd be directed back to the front entrance. But if she reached the secret door without being seen, the Anbu left her alone, even though she knew that they were fully aware of her presence. She hadn't been taken back to the front since she was 9. Naruto never saw any of the Anbu on duty, but she always knew when they were close by. The hairs on the back of her neck would bristle, and now she wondered if maybe the Kyuubi could sense them somehow. Did the seal even work that way? She shook herself, making a mental note to ask the Hokage about it another time, and continued along the dimly lit passage. It spiraled through the tower to exit in the Hokage's office. Naruto thought that it must be a secret escape route, given that the entrance was concealed by a false panel behind the desk. Just as the door to the office came into sight, an Anbu dropped into Naruto's path. You must wait 3 minutes, the Anbu whispered precisely, voice pitched in a way to make discerning gender all but impossible. Normally, Naruto could tell just from the body shape, but this Anbu was wearing the all-concealing cloak that was sometimes a part of the uniform. He finishing up a meeting? She asked, leaning against the wall. At the affirmative nod, she squinted through the dim light to study the ANBU's mask with interest. The white masks were a trademark of the elite group and were always stylistically painted to resemble some animal. Naruto always paid careful attention to the markings. The material of the mask looked like porcelain, but she was sure that it was probably something much less breakable, and much more breathable. This mask looked like some kind of rodent and was unfamiliar to her. Rat or mouse? She questioned with a grin. The Anbu always tried to remain silent around her, so she made it a personal goal to make them speak. The shinobi tilted their head as if to say that they knew exactly what Naruto was doing and that it wouldn't work. Instead of replying verbally, the Anbu held up 2 gloved fingers. Mouse, then, Naruto confirmed. Nice to meet you. Can I go in now? The Anbu was still for a moment before turning to swing open the door and stepping aside to allow Naruto to pass. She turned to thank the Anbu, but they had already disappeared back into the gloom. Naruto shrugged and slid the panel back into place. Hi, Gigi, she said, moving to stand beside his chair. When the old man swiveled to face her, she clutched at his hand with both of her own. Hello, Naruto, Sarutobi chuckled, squeezing her fingers and patting the top of her head with his free hand. What can I do for you today? Naruto pulled back and leaned on the desk. Well, I actually have 2 questions for you, she said, scratching at her cheek. Why did I get put on a team with Sasuke and Sakura? The Hokage reclined in his chair and took a long draw on his pipe. There are several answers to that question, Naruto. Most importantly, Kakashi requested you to be on his team, the council wished for Sasuke to work with Kakashi, and Sakura was chosen to fill the gap because her strengths complement the pair of you. I also believed that you 3 would be helpful to one another. Naruto gaped at him. Sensei really asked for me. But why? I've never even met him before. Sarutobi smiled warmly. I think that is something that you should ask him yourself. You should have more faith in yourself, Naruto, he said, laying a hand on her shoulder. Several of the Junin expressed an interest in you this year. You aren't just saying that to be nice, are you? Naruto asked, peering at the old man suspiciously. She couldn't stand for most people to touch her, but the Hokage was different. He had always been gentle and kind, never raising a hand toward her in anger. However, she was still feeling a little on edge after tangling with her classmates, and she only tolerated the contact for a moment before shifting impatiently. The Sandaime laughed and patted her shoulder before withdrawing his hand. I meant it. Some people look at you and see only a promising shinobi. Now, what was your second question? Naruto willed the blush to leave her cheeks, mentally thanking the Hokage for changing the subject. Compliments like that were few and far between, and she had no clue how to react when she actually received one. Kakashi-sensei asked us a question to think about for tomorrow, and I'm pretty sure it's a trick. I mean, like it is a lot more complicated than it seems. That does sound like something he would do, Sarutobi agreed, puffing on his pipe. Why don't you tell me what he said and talk through the answer for me? Well, he wanted us to tell him what is the most important thing about being a shinobi, and at first I would say one of the jutsu styles, or a log for kawarimi, but I think he means something more, she trailed off, searching for the right word. Having a log at hand is certainly important, but you are right in that it is not quite the answer he is looking for, the Hokage laughed. So, which areas were you tested on in the exam? Nin, Gen, and Taijutsu, assertiveness, a written exam over history and tactics, chakra control, and cooperation, Naruto recited dutifully. As she said the last test area, her brow furrowed. Wait, Kakashi-sensei said that he could pass some of us and send the others back to school, but Iruka-sensei gave this huge speech about being in a team. Maybe he means we should work together. She was surprised that she could remember Iruka's words, given that she had been doing her best to tune him out in the aftermath of her panic attack, but as Sarutobi hummed noncommittally, Naruto was glad that she had absorbed the lesson. I mean, even the Anbu don't usually work alone, do they? She deflated a little as she thought about who exactly was on her team and released her breath in a long sigh. I don't think that Sasuke or Sakura will want to work with me though. The Hokage blew out a ring of smoke toward the ceiling and gave her an indulgent smile. Be more confident in yourself, Naruto. I know that you can bring them together. Thanks, Gigi, Naruto said with a small smile. She wasn't nearly so sure that she could convince the other two members of her team that they needed to work together. Hopefully, they would come up with the answer on their own and she wouldn't have to try to persuade them. Naruto's stomach churned with nerves about Kakashi's second test all night and she slept poorly. After hours of tossing and turning, gave up on sleeping any longer and sat against her wall to gaze out the window at the pre-dawn village. With her knees tucked under her chin, Naruto took peace in the still, quiet rooftops and the Hokage monument, which was just visible through the faint light. When her battered alarm went off, the shrill sound startled her and she quickly unfolded to turn it off. Naruto stretched with a faint groan. Her eyes felt puffy and a faint headache throbbed in the back of her head. Although Naruto healed from physical wounds with a speed that bordered on ridiculous and was rarely ill, for some reason, headaches seemed to slip through her natural resilience. She didn't get them frequently, which made it all the more distracting. Still, she did her best to ignore the sharp throbbing at the base of her skull and behind her eyes, knowing it would abate sooner or later. With one last crack of her back, Naruto got out of bed and shuffled into the small kitchenette. She had stopped by a neutral grocer on the way home yesterday, so her cabinets were full of options. Judging from Iruka's resigned certainty about Kakashi's tardiness, Naruto felt sure that her sensei would be atrociously late again, so she decided on a hearty grain cereal and a large ripe plum to keep her full. After a quick shower, Naruto peered into her wardrobe critically. Her favorite orange outfit was still in tatters, which was depressing for more reasons than one, given that she really could have used the emotional comfort it provided. She wasn't really sure how to mend it to be wearable again. Naruto was fairly competent with a needle and thread, and she was no stranger to repairing small tears, but the orange jacket seemed to have more holes than fabric. Her wardrobe contained a decent amount of casual clothing, but none of her t-shirts were made from shinobi fabrics, so they tore and stained easily. A canvas bag slumped over at the bottom of the wardrobe caught her attention and Naruto peered into it curiously. I can't believe I forgot about this, she muttered. She dug through the bag and withdrew her graduation gift from the Hokage. The present had slipped her mind because of everything that had happened in the last couple days. Inside the bag was an outfit that the Hokage had claimed reminded him of what his old student wore. The top was dark orange, sleeveless, and hit her at mid-thigh. It had to be secured with a black sash and the wrapped style reminded her a little of the yukata provided at the baths. Naruto examined the fabric critically and was pleased to find the material extremely sturdy despite being so soft. It figured that the Hokage would give her something practical as well as beautiful. The top came with a pair of black cropped pants that hid a surprising number of pockets. Naruto slipped on the new clothes over her usual base layers and stepped into the bathroom to scrutinize the outfit. Her view was limited due to the small size of the mirror, but Naruto had long discovered that by standing on a stool in the shower, she could see her lower half. The outfit was flattering and functional and she really appreciated the orange. Naruto hopped off the stool and kicked it out of the way before heading back to the kitchen. After washing her dishes, she looked at her clock and sighed. It was still too early, but she supposed it wouldn't hurt to get a little warm-up in before everyone else showed up. She affixed her pouches, tied on her headband, and stepped into her sandals before heading out to the meeting place. The training ground was quiet and peaceful when she arrived. It was equipped with fairly standard training materials: a small stream for water jutsu, 3 upright logs for kunai or taijutsu practice, and of course, plenty of trees. Naruto pursed her lips as she mentally judged the size of the open clearing at the center of Training Ground 7. She always liked to start her warm-up with a bit of running to loosen up her muscles, but the field was small enough that it would probably take about 500 laps before she even started to sweat. Her immense chakra capacity ensured that she also had an absurd amount of stamina. Since she had just trekked across the village to get to the training fields, Naruto decided to have a light spar instead. She brought her fingers together into a cross-shaped seal and created a single shadow clone. It took a surprising amount of concentration to create only one, rather than the hundreds that she had produced so easily a couple nights ago. Okay, I'm going to do defense only for now so I don't pop you too quickly, she said to the clone, squashing a twinge of embarrassment for literally talking to herself. How do you want to call it, boss? The clone asked as it dropped into an aggressive taijutsu stance. Naruto lowered into a defensive crouch and hummed thoughtfully. Let's start at 5. Critical hits only. Glancing blows don't count. The moment she finished speaking, the clone launched its attack. Naruto rolled her eyes at her own impatience and blocked several quick punches. She catching a fist aimed at her face and used the momentum to throw the clone over her shoulder. Naruto skipped away as the clone rebounded off a training log and flew back at her. She resisted the urge to throw a jab at its exposed side, instead making a mental note of the hole in her form. The clone kicked high at Naruto's head and snuck a hard blow to her torso when she reached up to block. That's one, it said smugly, leaping back to create some space. Yeah, and it'll be the only one, Naruto retorted, rubbing irritably at her ribs. As she fell back into a defensive stance, something moved at the edge of her peripheral vision, disrupting her attention long enough for the clone to land a palm strike to her face. There was a terrible crunching sound and blood gushed from Naruto's nose. She swore and lifted a hand to assess the damage. Her nose was definitely broken. It throbbed painfully in time with the headache that still lingered behind her eyes. She glared at the clone, pupils dilated in fury. The clone gulped, knowing its own temper well enough to realize that it was screwed. It seriously considered dispelling, but knew that unless Naruto got out the aggression, she would be in a black mood for the rest of the day. It came from taking one too many sucker punches without being able to defend herself or retaliate. Naruto launched herself at the clone, tackling it to the ground and popping it in a single vicious strike. As she kneeled on the ground, her pupils constricted to a more normal diameter and she let out a shaky breath as the rage-induced fog faded from her mind. She waved the lingering smoke from the dispelled clone away from her face with a scowl. Her irritation lingered, caused both by the broken nose and her own reaction to getting hit. Naruto knew that flying into a rage was a terrible weakness, but she wasn't sure how to go about stopping it. She straightened and used her forearm to wipe her face. Blood continued to flow steadily from her nose and she grimaced at the amount that dripped down the front of her new shirt. Fortunately, shinobi fabrics were highly stain-resistant and there was a perfected method of removing blood from clothing. It was one of the first skills taught in the academy. Great, she muttered under her breath. As she turned toward the small stream, Naruto startled badly at the sight of Sasuke leaning nonchalantly against one of the training logs. Morning, she offered, her heart racing as she shook herself and knelt by the water. He replied, his eyes sharp and glued to her every move. Naruto did her best to ignore him and splashed her face, scrubbing lightly at her skin. The blood still trickling from her nose felt scalding hot compared to the icy steam water and she wiped it away again, probing her nose gently. It felt crooked and she knew from experience that it wouldn't stop bleeding completely and start healing unless she straightened it back out. She really hated broken noses. When did you learn how to make a shadow clone? Crunch. I'm sorry, what did you say? Naruto asked through gritted teeth. Tears streamed reflexively from her eyes as her nose throbbed with renewed vigor from being jerked back into place. Pinching the bridge of her nose to staunch the remaining blood flow, she rummaged through her hip pouch with her free hand and withdrew a scrap of cloth. She submerged it in the cool water and then carefully wiped her face clean. A small jar was thrust into her field of vision and Naruto looked up to see Sasuke offering it to her. She raised a questioning eyebrow at him. It'll help with the swelling and pain. There's a numbing agent in it. Oh, thanks, Naruto replied, taken aback by the kind gesture. She accepted the jar and opened it, peering curiously at the contents. It appeared to be a standard healing ointment, but with her nose currently out of action, she couldn't be certain that there wasn't something special in the formula. As she dabbed the salve on and around her nose, Sasuke repeated his earlier question. She hesitated, wondering how much she was allowed to tell him. The Hokage hadn't really said whether that mission was classified, which is why she mentioned it to Sakura the day before. But while Sasuke hadn't been openly rude to her, he also didn't do anything to stop Sakura's verbal abuse. Naruto wasn't sure that she really wanted to tell him anything. Unbidden, the Hokage's confidence that she would make the team work rose to her mind and she sighed quietly, deciding to bury the past and extend an overture of friendship. Like I said yesterday, I helped Hokage Gigi with Mizuki. Since I can't make a regular bunshin, he taught me how to make shadow clones instead of cash as payment. At Sasuke's blatantly interested expression, Naruto grimaced. I'm not allowed to teach Kage Bunshin to anyone else, she explained, wincing internally at the disappointment on her teammate's face. Why did he teach you shadow clones instead of just helping you with a standard bunshin? He asked, interest still glimmering in his eyes. Naruto felt her cheeks heat from the focused attention and she fought the urge to fidget. Well, like I said, I have a lot of chakra. It's why I'm not very good at genjutsu. Gigi said I'll need to have much finer control over my chakra before I could make an illusionary bunshin. Kage Bunshin takes your chakra and splits it evenly among the clones, and when dispelled, the clone provides you with a memory feedback. So if you don't have large enough chakra reserves, it could kill you. They don't even consider letting you learn it until you make Junin. As Sasuke stood quietly, looking thoughtful, Naruto returned the little jar of ointment. He blinked several times and accepted the jar, slipping it back into his hip pouch. Can you only make the one clone? He asked, focusing sharply on her. Oh no, I can make a lot more than that, Naruto replied, watching her teammate warily. He was eyeing her oddly, almost as if he were sizing her up for a fight. With an exasperated sigh, the dark-haired boy gestured with his hand as if to ask how many. Well, the first time I used it, I made about 1,000, she admitted reluctantly. I could, probably make more, if I really tried. Sasuke stared at her incredulously. How is that even possible? He burst out, completely breaking out of his usual stoicism. Naruto chewed her lip uncertainly, trying to think of a reason that she could give him for having more chakra than any human really had a right to have. After learning about the Kyuubi, she had begged the Hokage for anything he could share about her parents. He finally relented and told her that her mother's name was Uzumaki Kushina and that the Uzumaki used to be a large clan famous for their fuinjutsu, incredibly long lifespans, and massive chakra reserves. She felt fiercely protective of the tiny amount of information she had managed to get, but given that the alternative would be to take a flying leap of faith and explain about the demon sealed in her gut continuously bolstering her own reserves, Naruto thought it was easier to talk about her mother. Besides, it was mostly true. Even if she didn't have the Kyuubi, she would have had an obnoxious amount of chakra anyway. And the Hokage had said that she wouldn't be able to access the Kyuubi's chakra without special training, so she really was only using her own stores. It's something like a bloodline, she said finally. Gigi told me that the Uzumaki clan was practically wiped out during the Third Shinobi War because they were feared for having so much chakra that they lived for decades longer than usual, and they were brilliant with deadly sealing techniques. Naruto cleared her throat awkwardly and stared at her feet. Sasuke inhaled quickly, no doubt preparing to continue his interrogation, but the arrival of their third teammate halted the query in his throat. Sasuke-kun, Sakura called, hurrying over to them. Naruto had never been so glad to see her. She was starting to regret being so open with Sasuke, given that he hadn't really been nice to her since they were about 6. It hadn't felt right to tell him to mind his own business, and the Hokage had definitely encouraged her to try to make friends with her teammates. She hoped that if she took a leap of faith and let them have a glimpse of who she really was, they would do the same with her. She quickly stuffed the soiled cloth that was still clutched in her fist back into her hip pouch, sniffing experimentally to gauge how her nose was doing. It didn't really hurt very much anymore, even though she could tell that it still wasn't healed yet. She made a mental note to ask Sasuke where he got that medicine when she had the chance. Naruto didn't want to bring it up in front of Sakura, mostly because she didn't feel like rehashing the entire event. "Morning, Sakura," she offered with a faint smile. The pink-haired girl turned reluctantly away from her crush and gave Naruto a semblance of a smile. It didn't seem genuine, but Kakashi's scolding from yesterday still seemed to be affecting her. "Hi," Sakura replied, green eyes lingering on the blood dotting the front of Naruto's shirt. Her brow furrowed, and for a moment, Naruto thought she would ask about the dark stains. Instead, Sakura shook herself lightly and turned back to Sasuke. Naruto sighed. It seemed that was as good as she was going to get for now, but it was definitely a start. And it was a huge improvement over Sakura's behavior in the classroom yesterday. She meandered over to one of the training logs and hopped up to sit on top of it. Humming quietly under her breath, she wondered if she should broach the subject of Kakashi's question with her team. It felt like the right thing to do, given that she was fairly certain that the answer was teamwork, but Sakura was blatantly projecting a "don't talk to me" aura, and Sasuke had already retreated into his stoic bubble. The choice was taken away from her, however, with Kakashi's arrival. The Junin was accompanied by a generous puff of smoke. Naruto pulled a small field watch out of her pouch and gaped at it. Both Iruka and the Hokage and given her the impression that Kakashi was known for being chronically late to everything that wasn't a legitimate emergency, and according to her watch, he was 5 minutes early. He glanced at her, and Naruto remembered with a slight jolt that he had specifically requested her to be on his team. She still didn't think she had ever met him before, even if his chakra did feel familiar, but she couldn't help wonder if maybe he was here on time because of her. "Good morning," Kakashi greeted with a smile, eyeing all 3 genin equally now. "I trust you have all given my question consideration." "Yes, sensei," Naruto replied as Sakura and Sasuke both nodded. "Excellent. Here is what I would like you to do," the Junin said. He flicked 2 small bells that were tied to his belt. "Using your answer, you will try to take these bells away from me. You will have until noon to get a bell," Kakashi explained, withdrawing a small alarm from his hip pouch. "When this alarm goes off, whoever has managed to get a bell will pass. If you can't get one, you'll have to go back to the academy." Now Naruto was sure that teamwork was the right answer here. There was just no way that a fresh out of school genin could get anything from a Junin alone. She glanced at her teammates and suppressed a pang of disappointment. Sasuke's eyes were focused single-mindedly on the bells at Kakashi's hip, and Sakura was downcast, twiddling her fingers. Getting them to work together may be even harder than she initially thought. The genin waited in tense silence as Kakashi approached the training logs, where they were crowded on one end, to place the clock on top of the log in the middle. He hummed thoughtfully and then adjusted the clock with no discernible effect. Naruto startled as the Junin abruptly vanished and reappeared in the middle of the clearing, back facing the steam. "Begin." As soon as Kakashi finished speaking, both Sakura and Sasuke leapt into the trees. Naruto deliberated anxiously. Her teammates had gone in opposite directions and she wasn't sure who would be more approachable. While she had managed to establish somewhat of a rapport with Sasuke, he was so stubborn about doing everything by himself that she wasn't sure the tentative connection would be enough. Sakura had made it abundantly clear that she only tolerated Naruto's presence, no doubt a lingering effect of whatever their sensei had said to her. But the pink-haired girl was more likely to listen to logic and she definitely wasn't as confident as Sasuke about her skills. Sakura could potentially be more open to working together. Keeping a wary eye on her smiling sensei until she was in cover, Naruto crept into the trees to search for her teammate. Once she was marginally safer in the dense cover of foliage, she extended her senses in preparation for seeking out the pink-haired girl's chakra. However, before Naruto could even start looking, Sakura's perfume flooded her senses. She pinched her nose to hold of a sneeze and then snorted softly to clear the strong scent from her nostrils. How had she not noticed this perfume before? It was cloyingly sweet and now Naruto could actually taste it, having tried to avoid the smell by breathing through her nose. She moved silently through the brush, trying simultaneously to follow the perfume and not inhale too deeply and risk choking, had Sakura bathed in it. Naruto made a mental note to tactfully ask the other girl to take it easy with the scent. An enemy nin would be able to find her from a mile away. Finally, as the perfume intensified, Naruto spotted Pink and crept up behind her teammate. Sakura, she breathed, hoping that the kunoichi didn't scream in surprise. To her credit, Sakura made no sound beyond a soft gasp, but she did startle violently and shoot a reflexive elbow toward the Naruto's head. Stop, stop, she hissed, it's just me. She deflected the strike and held on to the other girl's arm to prevent any further attacks. Naruto, you idiot, what are you doing? Sakura shot back in an angry whisper, jerking her arm out of the blonde's grip. We need to work together to get the bells, Naruto said softly. She ruthlessly suppressed the pang of hurt from the faintly disgusted expression on the pink-haired girl's face. Before Sakura could argue, Naruto quickly shared the hints she had gotten from the Hokage and why she thought they should work as a team. Besides, can't you feel his chakra? She asked, grimacing. There's no way we could get a bell from Sensei on our own. That does make sense, I guess, Sakura agreed. She looked extremely reluctant and it didn't take long for her concern to turn to the object of her affection. But what about Sasuke-kun? Naruto sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. That's not going to be easy. He isn't going to want to work with us, but we've got to convince him. I don't even think getting the bell is all that important. I bet he just wants to see us working together. The pink-haired kunoichi hummed thoughtfully. Maybe when Sasuke-kun tries for a bell, we can just jump in and support him without involving him in the planning process at all. That's not a bad idea, Naruto said. She wouldn't have thought Sakura could be so practical about the Uchiha. He won't even have the chance to turn us away. Let's keep a close eye on him so we know when to help. The two girls crept back up to the edge of the clearing and peered through the gaps in the leaves at Kakashi, who was still standing in the center with bored posture. While they waited for Sasuke to make his move, Naruto gathered her courage. Hey, Sakura, she whispered. Can you possibly use a little less perfume next time? I'm not sure if you knew, but it's really strong, Naruto said quickly, hoping she wasn't about to become victim to one of Sakura's enraged beatings again. To her surprise, the other girl blushed and hid her face in her hands. I know, she groaned. I was running late this morning and accidentally spilled the whole bottle on my dress. There wasn't any time to change. Oh, that's good, Naruto sighed. I thought that maybe you just couldn't tell. Is it really that bad? Sakura asked, peering at her through spread fingers. Her cheeks were bright red. I think it's really just me, the blonde said, taking pity on the mortified girl. I have a really sensitive nose. You don't think Sasuke-kun noticed, do you? It's hard to say, Naruto whispered. I can't really tell what he's thinking most of the time. But I think he would have said something. Sakura released a shaky breath in relief. Thanks, Naruto, she said softly, turning her eyes back to the clearing. Naruto blinked at her in surprise before facing forward again with a small smile. It took another 15 minutes for Sasuke to get tired of hiding while Kakashi stood there looking like he was about to nod off. The dark-haired boy leapt out and immediately engaged the Junin in taijutsu. Sasuke appeared to be holding his own, but when Naruto looked more closely, she saw that their sensei was hardly even trying. She signaled to Sakura, who quickly cast a basic perception-altering genjutsu on Kakashi. It was extremely subtle and weak enough that the Junin might not even notice it, given his large chakra reserves. The jutsu always worked on Naruto because of how much chakra she had, which was why she thought they had a chance with it against their sensei. Kakashi stumbled almost imperceptibly, indicating to the girls that the jutsu had taken hold. Before he could recover, Naruto burst into action. 4 shadow clones erupted from the stream and leapt at their sensei, restraining his limbs. Sasuke's eyes narrowed angrily at the interference, but he took advantage of the opening and lunged for the bells. But just before his fingers could make contact, Kakashi vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving a short log in his place. Damn it, we were so close, grumbled a clone. The real Naruto emerged from the tress with Sakura trailing behind her and dispelled the clones with a hand seal. Sasuke glared at them both. I could have gotten a bell on my own, he insisted irritably. I don't need your help. Before he could retreat back into the woods, Naruto caught the back of his shirt. He was playing with you, she said bluntly, letting go of his clothing and backing away slightly. What do you mean? The Uchiha asked with a scowl, brushing imagined dirt from his shirt. We were watching the whole time and Sensei was barely even paying attention, Naruto explained, holding her hands up in supplication against the dark glower. Look, you're good, really good, but Kakashi-sensei graduated from the academy at 5 years old. When he was our age, he was already a Junin. Hokage Gigi told me that he's one of the strongest ninja in the entire village. Sensei could wipe the floor with all 3 of us in his sleep. Sasuke's scowl deepened at the insinuation that he wasn't good enough. Then what do you suggest? He asked begrudgingly. We almost got him and that was without including you in the planning, Naruto replied. She could hardly believe that he was sticking around and actually listening to her. If we work together to come up with something better, Sakura chimed in, I think we can get the bells. The Uchiha crossed his arms across his chest stubbornly. Even if we do team up, one of us is still getting sent back to the academy, he pointed out. Unease suddenly crept along Naruto's spine and she looked around nervously. Let's get into cover, she suggested quietly. We're sitting ducks out here. The 3 hopeful genin retreated back to the trees, where Naruto repeated her suspicion that the bells themselves didn't really matter as much as working together as a team. Sasuke reluctantly admitted that her theory made sense and agreed to try it their way once. If this doesn't work though, I'm going alone again, he warned. Naruto nodded, knowing that this was probably the best she was going to get out of him. The one time is all we need, she said more confidently than she felt. Okay. Does anyone have any explosive tags? It took nearly all of their remaining time to track Kakashi down and when they finally found him lounging near the KIA Memorial, there were barely 15 minutes left on the clock. He was nose-deep in the same little orange book that he had been reading earlier but he glanced up when a herd of genin came charging from the forest. Dozens of Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke clones massed together and swarmed toward the Junin. Kakashi slipped his book into his hip pouch and defended himself, sending several clones flying away to pop in midair. He thrust a palm strike at Sakura's face, but his hand went straight through her head, throwing off his balance and allowing a shadow clone of Naruto to land a solid hit to his ribs. The bells tinkled quietly. The Junin recovered ridiculously quickly and he leapt back for a little time to assess the situation. He threw a handful of shuriken at the crowd, popping several shadow clones and passing through the illusionary bunchen. From within the mass, a huge fireball erupted, destroying the clones in front of it and forcing Kakashi to use a quick water jutsu to defend himself. A dozen kunai burst through the resulting steam, all of which the Junin either dodged or deflected with his own weapon. The alarm sounded shrilly, the remaining shadow clones popped and the Bunshin faded away. The three genin emerged from the tree line, proud grins on Naruto and Sakura's faces and a slight smile upturning the corner of Sasuke's mouth. Kakashi's eye narrowed at their expressions and looked down at his hip to see two frayed strings. Sakura and Sasuke each brandished a bell smugly. Very good, Kakashi praised, brushing a bit of soot from his flak jacket. But what about you, Naruto? The blonde glanced at her teammates, hoping that they would stick to the rest of the plan now that they each had a bell in their hands. Sakura looked down at her bell uncertainly. Just as Naruto's heart was beginning to sink, Sasuke scoffed and tossed his bell at her. Naruto caught it and grinned gratefully at him, the tears that had been prickling her eyes fading away. Is that your answer then? Kakashi asked, stuffing his hands in his pockets. At the genin's nods, he smiled widely, visible eye crinkling happily. Congratulations. You all pass. Sakura whooped and leapt excitedly into the air while Sasuke smirked, assuming a posture. Naruto felt a wide grin stretch across her face as happiness overwhelmed her. She could hardly believe that she was finally a genin. The Junin turned and patted the top of the memorial rock fondly. This is the monument for all the Konoha shinobi that gave their lives for this village. My entire team is on this rock. Each of them and every other person on here all died to save the lives of their friends, teammates, and everyone else in the village. Kakashi's nostalgic smile faded to a serious expression. Teamwork is the most important aspect of being a shinobi. There will always be someone out there who is stronger, smarter, and all around better than you, and the only way to overcome such adversity is by working with your team. Always remember that while those who break the rules are trash, those who turn their back on their team are worse than trash. He held out his hand expectantly and both Naruto and Sakura dropped the bells into his open palm. It is very important that you three get to know each other well. You need to be able to trust your team. And I guess that means I should introduce myself properly now, he said with a smile. My name is Hitaki Kakashi. I like to read and train. I don't like to write reports or be on time. You kids were lucky today, and my dream is to see you three accomplish your dreams. Before I let you go for today, I have one last question. Why did you choose to become a shinobi? Like yesterday, neither Sakura nor Sasuke seemed willing to volunteer first. Naruto chewed her lip, resigned that she would probably always be the first one to speak. She steeled herself to be completely honest, truly wanting to take Kakashi's words to heart. But while she could stand to share some personal information, Naruto decided to wait until they were a little friendlier before divulging her greatest secret. She hadn't forgotten how Sakura had decided not to give her the bell. Naruto cleared her throat nervously, drawing the eyes of her team toward her. At first, I didn't want to be a ninja, she admitted, twisting her hands together behind her back. People don't like me very much and I tried running away from the village a few times. Once, when I was about 5, I got all the way outside the wall. An Anbu caught me, of course, but this time he didn't just take me home. He took me to see the Hokage. She grinned and rubbed the back of her neck. I love Hokage Gigi. He's the one who made me want to be a ninja. I saw how the Anbu watched over him and decided that I wanted to do that too. And when I found a few more people who became precious to me, I wanted to take care of them too. I want to be Hokage, Naruto declared, finally raising her eyes to look at her teammates and sensei. I know why people don't like me now and I want to take care of them so they know that there's nothing to worry about, nothing to be afraid of. And this is the village where the people I love live, so I want to protect it. For them. You'll make an excellent Hokage someday with that attitude, Naruto, Kakashi said fondly, reaching out to gently ruffle her hair. Naruto leaned away from the contact, but grinned at him, embarrassed color creeping up her neck. She glanced sidelong at her teammates. Sakura was looking at her with surprise mixed with shame, and Sasuke appeared to be appraising her again. The pink-haired girl frowned slightly. Since Naruto was so honest, I guess I should be too. My reason for being a ninja has gotten a little lost, I guess, she admitted. My parents are merchants, so when I was growing up, we traveled a lot between towns for deliveries and pickups. We always hired a team to keep us safe from bandits on the road. There was this kunoichi who got assigned to our guard pretty regularly. She was so amazing, Sakura said excitedly. She seemed so strong and capable and everything that I really wished I was. She sobered and her mouth twisted ruefully. She died, you know. On some mission that went bad. I can't remember her name or even what she looked like anymore. Sakura sighed softly and picked at the hem of her dress. When I was old enough, I asked my parents to enroll me in the academy. I wanted to be just like her. I guess, I forgot about all that in the last couple years. I won't forget again, she promised. Before anyone could comment on what the pink-haired girl had shared, Sasuke spoke up. My brother was my hero. I wanted to be like him, he bit out through clenched teeth. He went crazy and killed everyone, so now my reason for being a ninja is to hunt him down and bring him to justice for what he did. He spoke very quickly and pressed his lips together tightly when he was finished, clearly unwilling to disclose any more about the subject. Naruto didn't blame him. After all, she wasn't ready to talk about the Kyuubi yet. They just weren't at that level of trust. But as she looked at her teammates and sensei, Naruto thought for the first time that they may just get there. It looks like we're off to a good start, Kakashi said with a smile. I have a good feeling about you three. Let's meet back up here tomorrow morning at 8. For you guys, I guess I'll show up on time, he added with what Naruto presumed to be a wink. It was hard to tell when he only had one eye showing. We'll get some training in until noon, go for lunch, and then get our first mission from Hokage-sama, he explained. Take the rest of today off and go enjoy it. You won't be getting a lot of downtime from now on. Kakashi waved them away and then used a jutsu to vanish in a swirl of leaves. Naruto turned to her teammates, hoping that she wasn't about to sound too desperate. Do you guys want to get some lunch? She asked with feigned nonchalance. To her surprise, Sakura looked genuinely disappointed. Naruto thought that she must have finally broken through her prejudice. I'm sorry, but I can't. I promised my parents that I would help unload and stock some new merchandise when I was done this afternoon. Tomorrow, Sasuke promised with a nod toward Naruto. He turned to head back toward town, lifting a hand in farewell. Naruto thought that he seemed paler than usual. She bit her lip nervously and decided to ask before her courage failed her. Do you need an extra pair of hands? Sakura startled with surprise. She opened her mouth, but then closed it again thoughtfully. You know, she said after a moment. I think my parents would really appreciate that. They should probably get to know my teammates too. Her brow furrowed slightly and she hesitated again. Hey, Naruto, Sakura trailed off but then appeared to steel herself. I'm really sorry about not giving you the bell. I'm not trying to excuse my behavior or anything, but it's really hard to break bad habits. And I've been cruel to you for a long time. I'm trying to be a better person, but it will probably take a little time, she admitted honestly. Naruto was extremely taken aback. She would have never expected Sakura to be so self-aware, at least, she didn't think it would happen so quickly. It's okay, Sakura. I'm glad you're even trying, she said with a faint smile. Sakura frowned at her for a moment, but let whatever was bothering her go. Come on then. My parents' shop is right along Main. Smiling nervously, Naruto gestured for the other girl to lead the way. She was relieved that she hadn't been scathingly cut down for offering to help. It wouldn't have been the first time. Naruto thought that maybe this was a sign that Sakura was really beginning to acknowledge her. They walked through town, chatting stiffly, and Naruto hoped that her teammate didn't notice the villagers' reactions to her. As they drew nearer to the central market area, Naruto startled slightly as it occurred to her that Sakura's parents may be among the civilians who hated her. There was a high possibility that they were, given the pink-haired girl's usual attitude, and she didn't want to put Sakura in an awkward position. Her heart began to pound anxiously as they approached the small shop, which sold books and paper goods. It didn't look familiar, which meant that Naruto had never been evicted from it before. But that also meant that she just hadn't ever visited, not that she was actually welcome. Mom, Dad, I'm back. Sakura called as she entered the store, ducking under the light green Norin. Naruto panicked, reaching out to tug at the sleeve of Sakura's red dress. The other girl poked her head back under the short curtain with a questioning expression. I can't, Naruto whispered. I'm sorry, I just can't. Then she backed away and fled, ignoring her teammates' confused calls. She sped through the streets, trying to block out the usual hostility which was more concentrated since she was drawing attention to herself. Ascending the apartment stairs in 3 giant leaps, Naruto unlocked her door with shaking hands and darted inside. She practically slammed it behind her, locking it and then turning to lean back against the rough wooden surface. Idiot, she scolded bitterly. What's she going to think now? Taking a deep breath, Naruto pushed away from the door and headed straight for the bathroom. A cool shower always helped calm her down when she was upset. Before she even took 2 steps, someone knocked on her door. Dread made her heart pound heavily again and she turned back to peer through the peephole, hoping that it wasn't Sakura on the other side of the door. Explaining why she basically had a panic attack was not something she looked forward to. All she could see was an olive green flak jacket, which was enough to rule out her female teammate. Naruto released a shaky breath in relief and stepped back to open the door. Hi sensei, she greeted with a forced smile. Is everything alright, Naruto? Kakashi asked in concern, taking in her pale skin and fragile expression. Yeah, I guess. I just flipped out about meeting Sakura's parents and ran away. The Junin hummed thoughtfully. I think perhaps that some ramen is in order. I don't really want to talk. Wait, what? Naruto blinked in surprise. She had expected him to want to know why she panicked. Would you like to go to Ichiraku's? Kakashi asked pointedly. Naruto's smile transformed into something more genuine. Yeah, that sounds good to me, she said, slipping outside and locking the door behind her. So, why did you really come by? Kakashi stuck his hands in his pockets and set a sedate pace toward Tuki's ramen stand. Well, Hokage-sama said you had a question for me. The blonde stumbled at the unexpected response and her cheeks reddened. She never expected the Hokage to relay her curiosity and now she felt a little embarrassed to ask the man directly. How did you know I would be home? She deflected. I just followed your chakra signature. Oh. She walked beside her sensei in silence until they reached the ramen bar. After placing her order, she turned to face him and squashed her nerves. He was watching her patiently with a fond smile. Gigi said that you specifically requested me for your team. She hesitated and fiddled with her chopsticks. Why would you do that? What do you know about your parents? Kakashi asked lightly. Naruto startled and stared at him, not really sure what her parents had to do with anything. I know a little about my mom, but I don't anything about my dad, she admitted. Well, I was very close to your parents. Especially your father, the Junin explained, turning on his stool to rest an elbow on the bar. I'm afraid that I can't tell you much about him. Not yet, he said in response to the blonde's eager expression. I can tell you that he was a very talented shinobi and he loved your mother very much. He couldn't wait for you to be born. What did they look like? Naruto asked with a small smile. Kakashi frowned. Hokage-sama didn't show you any pictures. She shook her head negatively and watched as her sensei rummaged through his hip pouch and pulled out a worn book with a plain brown cover. He opened it and flipped through what looked like a stack of soft-edged photographs. When he found the one he was looking for, Kakashi handed it to Naruto. She accepted it with shaking hands. The photo was of a heavily pregnant woman. She had very long, brilliantly red hair and soft, gray-blue eyes. Naruto touched her mother's face with the tip of her finger, tracing the familiar shape. Kushina was beaming in the picture, hands resting on her large belly. Her face looks like mine, Naruto muttered, pleased at the revelation. Kakashi hummed in agreement. Your hair and eye color come from your father though. Sometimes you look just like him, he said wistfully. The conversation paused briefly as Tsuki served their lunch. After a few quick mouthfuls, Naruto tore her eyes away from the photo and turned back toward her sensei. Do you have any others? She asked, reluctantly handing the picture back to him. Kakashi exchanged the photograph for another, his eye crinkling in a smile. This is the last of Kushina-san without your father in it, he explained, placing his chopsticks in his magically empty bowl. I can make you a copy of them both, if you like. Yes, please, Naruto replied eagerly. She pushed away her bowl and leaned over the photo. This time, her mother was dressed in a standard Junin uniform, long hair pulled back in a high ponytail. She was standing behind 3 genin, grinning broadly as she rested her hands on the 2 boys' heads. Are any of her team still around? She asked hopefully. They were killed in a mission. Kushina-san retired after that. Kakashi shook his head. She was devastated. Oh. Naruto felt both sad and disappointed. She searched her mother's team's happy faces, committing them all to memory, before giving the photo back to her sensei. So you requested me because of my parents. I promised to look after you, Kakashi said. Although I haven't done a very good job of it so far. I was only a little older than you were when they died. When I found out what happened, he paused and glanced away. Well, I wasn't in any condition to be looking after a child. I am very sorry for that. I know you haven't had it easy and I should have at least offered you my home. Naruto picked at the remains of her ramen. Is that why we've never met before? Kakashi winced almost imperceptibly. There are a few reasons, really. I did check in on you whenever I was able. With a different sort of mask on. She frowned in confusion for a moment before she made the connection. You were in Anbu, she exclaimed softly, leaning toward the Junin conspiratorially. Are you allowed to tell me which mask you wore? Her sensei gestured for her to turn her head and he leaned down to whisper in her ear. You were the one who took me to Gigi. Naruto gasped. She straightened and grinned at him. You saved me that day, you know, she teased, hopping down from the stool. Thanks, sensei, for the ramen and the talk. I feel a lot better now. Good, Kakashi replied with a smile. Then I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Naruto spent most of the night preparing an apology and plausible explanation for Sakura for literally running away from the prospect of meeting her parents. By morning, she had managed a few uneasy hours of sleep and still wasn't sure how to explain her anxiety without telling the other girl about the Kyuubi. She supposed that Sakura didn't really need to know why people didn't like her and finally decided to play dumb about the whole situation for as long as she could. She dragged her feet getting ready and walked slowly toward the training ground. Naruto was hoping to avoid being with Sakura alone, but to her surprise and slight irritation, the kunoichi was waiting for her. Sakura was wringing her hands, distress and shame warring for dominance over her expression, and Naruto thought suddenly that maybe the other girl wasn't offended by her swift exit yesterday. Naruto, I am so sorry, the pink-haired girl said, rushing over to the startled blonde. After you left, I told my parents that you had offered to help out, and the moment I said your name it was like they turned into completely different people. Sakura spoke quickly and tears filled her jade-green eyes. They were so rude about you and it just made me realize how mean I've been to you all this time. I don't understand why you keep giving me more chances and I definitely don't blame you for leaving. Did you know that they would act that way? Naruto took a step back, reeling in shock over Sakura's rushed apology. She felt a sudden rush of sympathy for the other girl. Obviously Sakura had never directly broached the Naruto subject with her parents and was now completely baffled that they had reacted so negatively. In Naruto's experience, civilian parents were usually fairly subtle when teaching their children to hate her. They didn't want to risk coming anywhere near breaking the Hokage's law. Well, like I said yesterday, people don't like me, Naruto said haltingly. And by that, I mean pretty much everyone but a handful of shinobi and my few friends hate me. But why? Sakura exclaimed, reaching for her hands. She seemed taken aback when Naruto pulled away to avoid the contact but recovered quickly, lacing her fingers together again. I mean, you could be a little annoying at the academy, but that was obviously an act since you've been completely different for the last 2 days. What could you possibly have done to make the whole village act like this? I'm not ready to talk about that yet, Naruto replied uncomfortably. She clenched her fists behind her back, feeling the anxiety fluttering in her chest ease slightly from the sharp pain of her fingernails piercing her palms. She swallowed dryly, trying not to let Sakura's assumption that she had brought the hatred upon herself hurt her feelings. It's not anything that I've done, really. Just something about me that makes people afraid, she said stiffly. Sakura looked as if she wanted to press for a more satisfying answer, but Naruto's distressed expression must have made her think better of the idea. Well, whatever the reason is, I can't believe that you deserve it. I'll make sure my parents understand that there's nothing to worry about. Then you can come by the shop whenever you want, Sakura said. Naruto stared at the other girl, who must have a weakness for underdogs, as happiness warred with guilt. Sakura, she choked out. I can't even say how much that means to me, but please, please don't fight with your parents over me. It's not worth it. With a sigh, Sakura smiled ruefully. Okay, Naruto, but it's still not right and I won't let them badmouth you when they've never even met you. You need to be more confident about yourself, she scolded teasingly. That goes for you too, then, Naruto replied with a wry chuckle. She turned to the side and stretched her arms out over her head. Her back popped satisfyingly. Thanks, Sakura. I really appreciate it. The two girls waited in a comfortable silence until Sasuke arrived. He blinked in surprise at the pleasant atmosphere, but shook it off quickly. They barely had time to exchange greetings before Kakashi showed up in his usual fashion, accompanied again by a swirl of leaves instead of the smoke. Good morning, you three. He greeted cheerfully. For some reason, Kakashi's happy demeanor sent chills down Naruto's spine. She tensed warily and waited for something horrible to come out of his smiling mouth. We'll be starting off with some conditioning this morning and then I want each of you to run through your taijutsu stances and the jutsu you currently have in your arsenal. Let's see. He paused, rubbing his masked chin thoughtfully. How about you begin with 50 laps around the training ground? The entire training ground. Naruto gaped at him. It seemed that her instincts were still spot on. Kakashi was going to be brutal. 2 grueling hours later, the Junin finally relented and allowed them a short rest. Even with her ridiculous stamina, Naruto was drenched with sweat. She plucked at her damp clothing with distaste, hating the way it clung to her body, and glanced at her teammates. Both Sakura and Sasuke were exhausted, although the Uchiha was stoically pretending that he wasn't gasping for air. Okay, Naruto. Since you are the least tired, let's see your taijutsu, Kakashi instructed as soon as her complexion had returned to its usual hue. She sighed dramatically, even though the few minutes rest had gone a long way toward her recovery from the strenuous physical activity, and trotted obediently over to her sensei. Under his watchful eye, Naruto ran through the standard academy taijutsu stances. Every so often, the Junin would stop her and make a small, but noticeable, adjustment. Who was the taijutsu instructor for your class? Kakashi asked, frowning as he spotted another mistake in Naruto's stance. The errors were subtle, but taken as a whole, Naruto's technique would have a lot of problems against a more skilled opponent. It was Mizuki, Naruto replied shortly. She repeated the corrected kata a dozen times to reinforce the change, imagining the smug silver-haired traitor as her target. Ah, Kakashi was well aware of Mizuki's treachery. It wasn't much of a surprise that he would have tried to sabotage Naruto to further his goals. You still placed third in the taijutsu rankings though, didn't you? That's just because I can take a lot of hits, and nobody at the academy could outlast me, the blonde admitted sheepishly. Those are very good things, Naruto. Don't sell yourself short, Kakashi admonished, frowning at her dismissive tone. All things considered, your technique isn't that far off. It probably won't take very long before you have the corrections down in your muscle memory. Just be thankful that I don't have to send you to the village taijutsu expert, he added with an exaggerated shudder. Who's that? Naruto asked curiously. She couldn't help wonder who the mysterious expert was and why he would have provoked such a reaction from the usually unflappable Junin. Just pray that you never run into the man. Be wary of green spandex, he intoned. As soon as Naruto finished her last kata, Kakashi stepped back to give her more space. Okay, let's see your ninjutsu and then I'll test your genjutsu ability. Naruto nodded and quickly ran through two of the academy basics, Henge and Kawarimi. She formed a cross-shaped seal with her hands and then paused with a slight frown. Sensei, how many shadow clones do you want me to make? Kakashi hummed thoughtfully. Why don't you make as many as you can? Okay, she said, shrugging. Naruto wasn't sure that her sensei knew just what he was asking, but she complied and focused on reaching to the near bottomless depths of her chakra. As a massive amount of blue-tinted chakra began to swirl visibly around her, she released the technique. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, she ground out through clenched teeth as her chakra surged almost painfully through her body. Hundreds of clones popped into existence, filling the field and beyond, perching on the trees, until there were well over 1,000. Naruto panted lightly from exertion. She had never drawn so heavily on her reserves, not even against Mizuki, who had been doing his best to kill her. Searching curiously for her teammates through the sea of blonde clones, Naruto grinned when she spotted them. They were sporting identical flabbergasted expressions. Sasuke's shock, however, seemed to be colored with a foreboding jealousy. Well, that is a bit more than I was expecting, Kakashi admitted. His hand moved toward his covered eye, but he paused and scratched his chin instead. A bit, Sakura echoed faintly. She did say she could make 1,000, Sasuke muttered irritably. He jerked his head to the side, dark fury written across his features. Kakashi cleared his throat. How much usable chakra do you have left? Can you still perform basic ninjutsu? I'm not sure, Naruto replied honestly. Let me try. She sent the instruction down the thread of chakra connecting her to the clones, and after a moment, they all transformed until the field was filled with copies of her teammates, Kakashi, the Hokage, and Iruka. Henge was nearly as easy as breathing for Naruto, which was something she had never understood given her difficulties with Bunshin. Both jutsu were classified as genjutsu, since they were illusionary techniques, and neither required much chakra to perform. She had long decided not to question it. Looks like Henge isn't a problem, Naruto said, currently in the guise of the village leader. She reverted back to herself and the clones followed soon after. Let's see about Kawarimi, then. She formed two hand seals and switched places with a clone on the far edge of the clearing. There was only a slight flicker and the clone's surprised expression to indicate that she had used the technique. Soon, the horde of clones flickered all over the field as they substituted with each other. That's good, very good. Can the original Naruto please come back over here? Kakashi called over the noise of the clones. Naruto replaced with one of the Kage Bunshin near her sensei and waved at him. I'm here. Go ahead and start dispelling them, but be sure to do it in small groups, the Junin advised. I'm sure Hokage-sama told you, but shadow clones transfer their memories back to you when dispelled. The mental strain is no laughing matter. The blonde nodded seriously, having already sat through a lecture from the Hokage for mass dispelling the entire group of clones after she took down Mizuki. She formed the cross seal again for focus and began popping clones a dozen at a time. After dispelling a handful of groupings, Naruto staggered slightly and pressed a hand against her forehead. That is pretty terrible, she gasped, and going to take a while to get used to. How in the world did I not get a headache last time? Kakashi chuckled, reaching out to place a steadying hand on her shoulder. He aborted the motion halfway, stuffing his hands in his pockets instead. It was probably the adrenaline, he suggested. You'll need to practice dispelling groups of clones so the memory feedback doesn't become a liability in a fight. It took another 20 minutes for Naruto to dispel the last of her clones. Every few groupings, she had to stop and wait for the chaotic rush of memories to subside enough to continue. By the time she finished, Naruto had a splitting headache and her chakra pathways felt wrung out. Kakashi directed her to lay down in the cool shade of one of the perimeter trees. He fished a clean cloth out of his hip pouch and handed it to Sakura. Wet this and place it across her forehead and eyes, the Junin instructed. It will help with the headache. Yes, sensei, Sakura replied. Sasuke, you're up. Kakashi gestured for the Uchiha to join him. By the time that both Sasuke and Sakura had been examined, Naruto's headache had abated to a faint throb, which faded away to nothing during the break for lunch. Kakashi treated the team to a barbecue restaurant owned by the Akamichi clan. The store was frequented nearly exclusively by shinobi, so there was little chance of Naruto facing any harassment. Oi, Naruto, called a familiar voice from within the depths of the restaurant. She turned curiously and grinned when she recognized Shikamaru and Choji, who were sitting with Ino and their sensei, Sarutobi Asuma. Naruto had never met the youngest son of the Hokage, but she had seen pictures of him in the Hokage's office and overheard a lot of praise. Hey guys, she greeted, heading toward their table. The rest of her team trailed behind her. Kakashi, I can't believe you finally gave in and took a team. Hokage-sama has been asking you for what, 6 years now? Asuma teased good-naturedly. Ah well, this year is different, Kakashi replied, eye crinkling in a smile as he ushered his team into the seats at the adjacent table. Sasuke-kun, you're welcome to sit with me, Ino simpered. She seemed blissfully unaware that there were no empty seats next to her. As usual, her eyes glossed right over Naruto as she switched from batting her eyelashes at Sasuke to glaring at Sakura. Leave him alone, Ino Buddha, Sakura spat, quickly sitting next to the silent Uchiha. Naruto rolled her eyes at their territorial behavior and took her seat, twisting around to face her school friends. Shikamaru and Choji had always been kind to her, even if they had never been able to hang out after school. Unlike most of her classmates, they had both recognized her gender right from the start. I'm glad you guys passed the second test, she said, genuinely happy for them. It was troublesome for sure, but not very difficult, Shikamaru drawled. Frankly, I'm surprised you managed to work together with those two. Naruto chuckled lightly. You know, it wasn't quite as hard as I thought it would be to convince them to work with me. Sakura responds really well to logic and Sasuke to action. Forced it on him, did you? Shikamaru asked wryly. You know me so well, Naruto said with a smile. But honestly, it was actually Sakura's idea to jump in without telling him. She's always been smart, Choji added after swallowing a bite of food. He laid out a generous amount of meat on the grill to cook. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. As long as she is thinking clearly, anyway. She gestured toward the other girls, who were leaning aggressively in each other's space and arguing loudly over something to do with Sasuke. The rest of lunch was a noisy affair. Naruto chatted happily with Shikamaru and Choji, the two Junin conversed casually, Ino and Sakura continued to fight over Sasuke, who attempted to ignore every single one of them. We're going to go get our first mission, Naruto shared excitedly as the last plates were cleared. Ah, Asuma cut in before any of his genin could respond, that's our cue to get back to work. We've done a couple missions already, he explained to Kakashi as he quickly ushered his team out of the booth and through the restaurant. What in the world was that about? Sakura asked, confused by the abrupt exit. Yeah, he didn't even let me say goodbye to Shika and Choji. Naruto protested, crossing her arms over her chest. She wasn't sure when she would get to see them next, especially since Kakashi was apparently going to keep them busy. He's probably just excited to make those kids actually do some work, Kakashi replied vaguely. We should get going too if we actually want to get a mission today. He paid for their meal and then led the way to the Hokage Tower. Hokage-sama likes to hand out the first genin missions himself, so after today we'll get our assignments from the mission office downstairs, Kakashi explained as they ascended the stairs to the Hokage's office. Hi Gigi, Naruto greeted as they entered the large, round office. She was tempted to circle around the desk to give the old man a hug. He was the only person she allowed such a thing, and even then, it was rare, but thought better of it. They were here on official team business after all. Good afternoon, Naruto, Team 7, the Hokage replied, humor coloring his voice. He puffed on his pipe and waved them forward. The other new genin teams beat you for mission choice this morning, so I'm afraid the pickings are rather slim. That's no problem, Hokage-sama, Kakashi assured. His visible eye gleamed with anticipation and unholy glee behind the genin's backs. What do we have to choose from? As the Hokage withdrew a handful of D-rank missions from his desk, the genin were nearly vibrating with excitement, even Sasuke, who was trying unsuccessfully to hide behind a stoic mask. We have 3 missions left. Weed Hanazuka-san's garden, walk the Inuzuka hounds, or repaint the siding on the academy building. Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke's jaws dropped simultaneously in outrage and shock. What kind of missions are those? Naruto burst out in frustration, clenching her fists and crossing her arms over her chest stiffly. Now, Naruto, the Hokage soothed. He appeared to be fighting back laughter. Every genin starts off with these missions. There are important lessons buried in each one that are up to you to discover. When Kakashi deems you ready, he can request a C-rank mission. Naruto opened her mouth to argue, because surely these missions could be completed by the academy students for practice, but was silenced by an elbow to her side. She leveled a glare at her pink-haired teammate, who was making covert hushing motions. Naruto rolled her eyes, but let it go. No one ever said that being a shinobi was fun all the time, and besides, it wasn't like she couldn't come back to talk to the Hokage later. I vote for the garden one, she said. I'm good with plants. Anything but the dogs is okay with me, Sakura added, shuddering at the thought of the massive Inuzuka nin dogs. Kakashi turned expectantly toward his quietest student. Sasuke. The garden is fine, he grunted reluctantly. Sasuke didn't look pleased at any of the prospects, and Naruto had the sneaking suspicion that he was envisioning the slow painful death of either their teacher or the Hokage. Hanazuka-san's garden it is. Kakashi enthused. He cheerfully accepted the appropriate scroll from the Hokage. Kakashi, come by later this week for a team photo, will you? Sarutobi asked. I have an open spot on my desk that needs to be filled. The Junin smiled at his disgruntled team. We'll be sure to drop by in the morning while they are still fresh. Let's go get this over with, Naruto sighed, swiping the scroll from her sensei. She stiffened as her teammates pressed close behind her to peer at the scroll over her shoulder, but forced herself to stay still. Hanazuka was a retired shinobi, taken out of action during the Third Shinobi War, which meant that he probably didn't have a reason to hate Naruto like the ninja who were injured on the night the Kyuubi broke loose. Have fun, the Hokage called as Team 7 exited the office. Naruto resisted an unexpected urge to make an ugly gesture when